Today we're going to talk about Mega-Gargants and the fact that they have a big problem. This is the new Beast Smasher Mega-Gargant that was shown off on the Warhammer community site yesterday, and it looks pretty decent. It's a Mega-Gargant. The Mega-Gargants are good models, but they do have an underlying issue, which is being massively exacerbated and made so much worse by the addition of the Beast Smasher and by the man himself, King Brod. See, the Beast Smasher has got two new parts. Got a new head and neck, and the head has got a skull as like a prosthetic eye, which is a really cool touch, and he's got a new hammer. Unfortunately, those are the only new things he's got, because the rest of him is just the Gatebreaker. The Gatebreaker has the same armour on the arms, it has the same kind of decoration around the waist and the loincloth, it has the same feet, it even has the same two humans being squished in his meaty hand. The only things that are different is his hammer, which is a slightly different shape, and the fact that he has a cowl rather than just a bare head with a bit of fur and some horns. Those are the only separating factors. The weapon and the head are the only things that are different about these two Mega-Gargants, and that's genuinely a pretty significant problem because the Mega-Gargants already looked kind of samey. Now, when I say kind of samey, I'm being a little bit generous because essentially, from the torso down, they have the same pose pretty much every single time. The legs are always in exactly the same position. The body is pretty much in the same position. There is a little bit of difference here and there, but really it's the legs. The legs and the feet being at the same angle is really, really noticeable. These are not small models. They are not little tiny shrimpy lads. Like, they overwhelm everything around them with the sheer size of them, which is what they're supposed to do. They are full-on giants, let's not forget, but that makes things like all the legs being exactly the same pose kind of noticeable. It does make it so that when you see a group of three of them together, you spot the similarities really quickly. And pretty much at the moment, when there's only three of them, the fact that they do have different trappings, they've got different armour, they've got different kind of loincloths and different decorations, different personalizations, that does a lot to help separate them. You know, there is enough there that you can pick out the fact that each one of them has got actually unique parts. The War Stomper has got different armour on his forearms and around the wrist and stuff than the Gatebreaker has, for the most part. The Kraken-eater has got separate stuff as well. There's nice little things that actually set them apart, which make things like the fact that the legs have exactly the same pose easier to overlook. The problem is that changed when they showed off King Brod, and it's only got worse now that they've showed off the Beast Smasher, because King Brod, in fact, whilst looking fairly unique, still shares elements with all the other Mega-Gargants because they reuse the torso and the legs for each different type now. So when you look at the legs of King Brod, he's got the Kraken-eater legs and he's got the War Stomper torso. So really, when it comes to King Brod, once again, the only things that are different are the head and the weapon. Yeah, he's got the horns, he's got the bits that go over the shoulders, but even the armour on the forearms is the same as you can find elsewhere. It's the Gatebreaker. He's got the same armour as him. So even with King Brod, a completely unique character, although I suppose technically they all are sort of unique characters, that is sharing elements with the War Stomper and the Kraken-eater and the Gatebreaker. To try and make him look different, they've simply taken elements from all the others and copied them onto him, which succeeds in not making him look different enough. Because he does have a big weapon, he does have a fancy skull for a helmet, and he's got the big two horns, but those are the only things that are different. The pose is still the same from the waist down, and if anything, your attention is going to be drawn to the shared elements that it has with the War Stomper and the Kraken-eater even more, because you'd see the fact that the legs are exactly the same, and then you notice that all the trappings from those two have been transplanted onto him. As you travel further up, then you realise, oh, he's even got the Gatebreaker's arms. So he's just got a mix of every other Mega-Gargant. It does succeed in making him look extremely kind of foreboding, quite threatening, quite impressive, but it also kind of feels a bit lazy, to be honest, and it feels a little bit lazy, and then it feels even more lazy when you look at the Beast Smasher and the fact that it's just the Gatebreaker, but with a different hammer and a different head. Effectively, it feels like we've reached the point where the shared elements between the different types of Mega-Gargant available in this kit are just not enough to maintain the semblance of them being different. When you take the fact that you have very similar stances and poses, the fact that the legs look pretty much exactly the same on every different Mega-Gargant, and then add to that the fact that their unique trappings, their things that separate them from each other, are now repeated across models, what you really get is something that ends up feeling even more samey than it did before. I think there was enough variation previously that whilst there was definitely a noticeable repetition, it wasn't as severe as it could have been. A lot was done to mitigate it. A lot of individual kind of touches were put on each of these models to make them feel like their own thing. Those unique things are now replicated. We now have the fact that the Warstomper, Kraken-eater and Gatebreaker, all of their unique stuff, or at least a section of their unique stuff, has been placed on King Brod, and now with the Beast Smasher, you've just got one of the Mega-Gargants repeated again, but with a different hammer and a different head. It's super noticeable now. It was noticeable before, don't get me wrong, but we've now reached the point where I think if you were to put down 4 of these on the table, it's very difficult at a glance to not immediately spot the fact that you're kind of running the same model 4 times. Of course, you could say exactly the same thing about Imperial Knights. After all, if you look at the Imperial Knights, you have 6 different knights out of one kit, whether you're talking about the Warden, the Gallant, the Preceptor, the Crusader, the Errant, the Paladin. You've got 6 different options built out of a single kit, and of course they have the same problem. The legs are the same pose every single time, and you're looking at exactly the same body, you're looking at the same chassis, the only difference being the weapons and the helmets. The difference for me is that Imperial Knights aren't living creatures. They're not organic. They are built from a template. They are supposed to be the same every single time. That's the nature of their construction. Mega-Gargants are not the same construction. They're not built. They're not formed out of one single file that is then printed or assembled over and over again. They are living organic creatures, so the idea that they would all have exactly the same pose, exactly the same body shape, body weight, that doesn't make any sense. It fundamentally feels wrong because it feels like you've got clones, not living creatures. It doesn't matter that Imperial Knights have a very similar stance to them because they're Imperial Knights. They are robots. They're not actually living creatures. Added to which, it is far easier to repose an Imperial Knight than it is a Mega-Gargant. I mean, the fact is that if you don't like the way your Imperial Knight is posed, with a little bit of cutting and a bit of plastic glue, you can repose them. It's actually not that difficult. It's something I've done quite a few times, funnily enough. To do a good reposing job on an Imperial Knight, you basically just need to be able to cut something off, and then turn it slightly, and then glue it again. You can't get away with that when it comes to Mega-Gargants. You need to be able to do some nice green stuff work. You need to be able to produce skin. That's not the case with Imperial Knights. You do not need to produce anything outside of a bit of cutting and gluing. I think the introduction of 2 more Mega-Gargants with so many shared elements from the original 3 really shows that this needs to be more than one kit. I don't think you can reasonably get 5 properly unique models out of one kit at this scale. When you're talking about repeated poses and you're talking about it on the infantry level, I don't think that's too bad, because I think within you've got enough stuff, you can hide it amongst everything else. If you're looking at an army that's got 40 infantry in it, and you do have some repeat poses, they might stand out a bit, but they're not going to stand out nearly as much as when you've only got 4 models on the table or 3 models on the table, and all 3 of them are standing exactly the same way. And it was already kind of obvious that they look very similar. Now that there's 5, all sharing the same body, all sharing the same trappings, all sharing the same unique signifiers, that's when it starts to become a big problem. And I think at this point, it is a big problem because these don't have the variety that they should. They do not have the individuality they should. Too much is being put onto one chassis to make sense for the context of what these are. Now, there may well be some of you saying, well, hang on, aren't you working on a Mega-Gargant army right now for Facehammer? I am, but none of my Mega-Gargants are made out of the Mega-Gargant kit. They're all made out of other stuff. So whilst I'm still using the army, I'm not using any of the models. Anyway, that's just what I think. The question is, what do you think? Do you think it's okay? Do you think actually it doesn't matter that they've got so many shared elements now? Do you think they could actually squeeze maybe another Mega-Gargant out of this kit? Or do you think that they're kind of really overdoing it and they're putting this kit under a lot more pressure than it can actually handle in terms of what they want out of it compared to how much they're putting into it? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click all the things, Patreon, video, subscribe, all that stuff. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to. As always, there's an affiliate link in the description for Element Games, which you can use to support the channel if you'd like. I leave it in your capable hands. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.